of Wrestling Chat with Friends. I am EJ the Collector. I'm here every week. We hope you're here every week. We appreciate you joining us tonight and every week on YouTube, on our YouTube page at Wrestling Chat with Friends, on Twitter at WCWF Pod, and on our Facebook group page, Wrestling Chat with Friends. Please join us. Please share. Please tell friends. We're trying to build this community of wrestling fans where we're here twice a week. Usually here on Tuesdays where we talk WWE. Thursdays we talk AEW. Tonight we're in the middle. Dynamite's going on right now, but we're recording. I have my tag team partner here. He's best for business always. He's the Handy to my Combs. He's the Bob Novak to my Paul Bagala. He is the Dennis Condrey to my Bobby Eaton. TJ, you're always best for business. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Did you just call me TJ?
TJ. We were talking high school basketball before we went on.
Oh, yeah,
John
we
Marshall,
were.
TJ.
Yeah, TJ. There you go.
TJ, you feeling good this week? Good to see you.
I feel good. I hope you're doing well. A very eventful week.
It
already.
has been. There's been a lot of wrestling already in 2023 with Wrestle Kingdom. There was the Battle of Los Angeles. There's been some exciting AEW and WWE action. Tonight we're going to talk WWE. And we're going to talk about all the goings on in the last week. It's been a crazy week for the Federation, most of which, I guess, has taken place outside the ring. So we're going to talk some inside baseball tonight. You and I are a couple of policy wonks, probably. So we're going to get deep into some business, into some rumors and some innuendo. But I want to break down all the ramifications of the goings on in the last week. So we hope you guys are ready to join us for this, and we might have a special guest on later, perhaps, if we can get a hold of somebody who messaged me earlier this week with some crazy conspiracy theories. Tom, how do you want to go about this? You want to start kind of chronologically, kind of with the let's just start chronologically with sort of what happened earlier, I guess, last week. So, tell me if it came as a surprise to you. We've kind of found out last week that Vince McMahon has inserted himself back into the company after retiring last July. I guess word came out after he announced his return that he had been sending some letters, maybe as early as December, asking the board to rejoin. He wanted to be part of, it seems like, the negotiations for this year's media rights. When you first saw the report that Vince was back on the board, he had brought George Barrios and the other executive onto the chairman's board also. What was your initial thought when that news broke that Vince was coming back and returning?
I think my initial thought is kind of where I am still now, which is it's not entirely clear to me yet what his actual end game is, like what his primary motivation is. Obviously, it goes without saying that there is an ego component to this where he's like, this is my company, I can do what I want, you're not going to force me out, I'm going to force you out, like all that stuff. But is his ultimate goal, in terms of his priorities, is number one getting creative control back? Is that what he really wants? Or is it, if I'm going to be forced out, I want to make as much money as I possibly can, and it really is a genuine interest just in the sale of the company, so he will become, literally a multi-billionaire if that happens? Or is it a situation where the sale is sort of a Trojan horse where he has linked himself to, we need to sell, or at least we need to renegotiate. We know we have to renegotiate our broadcast rights. And you need me for that. You need me for, I'm going to rewrite the bylaws so that you need my approval for any sale, et cetera, et cetera. And he just wants to get back on the corporate side of things. And so that's my first thought. And the reason why that's so critical is I think that is going to dictate what the universe of possibilities from here actually looks like. So as we'll get into in a minute, there was a lot of scuttlebutt, sort of unsubstantiated rumors about them selling to Saudi Arabia, which I have to give you credit. You were in the group chat, you were the first one who brought up that possibility. I was like, I can't see that. And I still feel that way for reasons I'll talk about later. But the point is that if his primary goal is genuinely, I want to be the chairman of the board. I want to be there for the renegotiation of the rights. And yes, I want it to be my company, but I'm not purely interested in just maxing out how much money I can get from a sale. If he wants to be like, I want to be the corporate face of WWE, if that's really his goal, then I think that the Saudi possibility becomes much more remote. If, on the other hand, it is a situation where he's like, I just want to make as much money as I can. And if this, look, I'm driving this car, and if I can't drive this car, I'm going to take it off a cliff. If that's his mentality, then everything is on the board.
So, I mean, I guess in a little bit of hindsight, was his retirement last summer completely insincere? Did he take that step because he was in a precarious legal position? He wanted to remove himself to avoid any personal liability, business liability, whatever. Because, we all got the sense that maybe he saw the writing on the wall. He knew he'd have some things he had to deal with that would take his time away from the business. He's also in his late 70s. Was there any sincerity to that retirement last year?
Speculation, but I would say, if you mean by sincerity, did Vince McMahon really want to stop working at WWE? No, absolutely not. I think that there was never a point where that was, if you took his potential legal troubles, and really the SEC stuff is the most significant from the standpoint of the corporate structure. Like, whatever's going on, on the personal side in terms of, possible misconduct and stuff, that's kind of largely separate from the question of his, corporate status. I think he got good advice. He has reportedly said since that it was bad advice. I think he got good advice that if the SEC is launching investigations about improper reporting of expenditures, it is going to make things go a lot more smoothly if you, the source of those expenditures, steps away from the company. I think that was good advice, but I think now he, and he has apparently said this behind the scenes, looks back on that as, if I had just ridden out the storm and let the news cycle play out, I wouldn't have had to walk away. And the people who told me to walk away did not have my best interest in mind. I think that's a little bit, delusional would be one way to put it. I think certainly at a minimum, it's very egocentric to think that way. This is the kind of thing, not the specifics of it, but SEC investigations are the kind of thing that happen at companies all the time. And in many, many cases, it is in the best interest of the shareholders if the conduct in question is localized around a person, that person separate him or herself from the business, at least temporarily. That's, not unusual. In fact, I think you could make the argument that's best practices. And Vince now sees that as a huge misstep. So no, it was not sincere.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. So before we jump to the next chronological step in the last week, which was Stephanie, when he retired, Stephanie was announced as a co-CEO with jolly old Saint Nick Khan. Triple H became chief content officer. I think universally people would say we saw a huge uptick in the way the show was creatively written, presented, and by all accounts, people were really pleased with how Triple H seemingly came in, turned things around. He brought in some talent that had been released over the past year, some to a lot of negative fan reaction. Some of his steps, we talked about this last week, have not maybe played out the way maybe even he thought it would with some of the returning stars who have not made maybe the same impact you would have thought. But the direction of the show, I think, improved. I think the creativity, the storylines drastically improved. Do you think Vince sees it differently? Do you think he doesn't care? Do you think is he going to give anybody else any credit, or the comparisons to the former president are just there, that, and I talk about it all the time. They're basically the same person. Everything they do, everything that goes right is because of them. Everything that goes wrong is because of something he wasn't involved in, or he did not have the ability to do things. This is different. When he left, I think things got drastically better. so it leads to your question about what is his end motivation. If seemingly his return could be a potential detriment to the company, in the opinion of some fans, yet he was unable to let that go. So do you think we can't speculate, but how do you not see a product that improved, with social media interactions? They're saying it's better. I mean, not universally, but roundly it was sort of said, this has been great. The company's in great shape. It's healthy, whether it sells or not. Triple H being the creative force. Now, there's been no public mentioning that Vince wants to come back and run creative, but the product was so good, and this kind of throws everything back into question, in my opinion.
A few things there to go through. I think the first thing is, I agree the product has been better, and for me, the biggest difference is in coherence of storylines. Because I think the thing with Vince was, when I look at Vince, like I think one thing that makes him different from Donald Trump is that Vince McMahon is a better businessman than Donald Trump is, more skilled businessman than Donald Trump is. And I think there was a time when Vince was exceptionally skilled creatively. But I think in the last decade that his abilities in that area have, for whatever reason, could be age, could be just, the game passing him by, whatever. I think his skills in that area have certainly diminished. While his creative, I think they still could put on good pay-per-views. The week-to-week programming was markedly, I think, weaker than it had been in previous eras. And I think part of that is, like I said, I think has to do with a coherence issue. And we've talked about this before, where Vince, the scuttlebutt was always like, he shows up at, Monday afternoon, tears up the show, starts from scratch 3 hours before airtime, like that kind of stuff. And I think the stability with Triple H has been noticeable. And from week to week, even if there are things that, we think aren't necessarily working, at least they click from sort of an A to B to C standpoint. So the example I use on the negative end would be like the Miz, Gargano, Dexter Lumis storyline. It went on too long, but it wasn't. There was a trajectory to it, and there are many more examples that did work and have been good. And I don't think there's any question, even if Vince thinks, from an ego standpoint, I could do this better than Triple H. My version was better than Triple H. You can't argue with ratings. And they've had some of the best ratings that they've had. I think the SmackDown rating last week was the highest rating in 3 years that they've had.
Yeah.
So those are like objective metrics you can point to and say, like, business is good. Let's not mess with it. So that comes back to the more fundamental question you raise here, which is, does Vince want creative control again over the company? Now, on the one hand, you say it's Vince, huge ego. Of course, he wants creative control. On the other hand, you might say, like, if this is sort of a vendetta against the people on the board who kind of pushed him out before, maybe he's really just focused on that side of it, which is also possible.
I want to bring up two people on the board that rebuffed his requests to return maybe in early December were his daughter and his son-in-law. Stephanie and Triple H were on that board. And when he was apparently requesting to come back, he was initially rebuffed by the board, and that would include his children. That adds a layer of drama to that. So could this be a vendetta against Stephanie and Triple H? So while we're there,
yeah,
let's also just mention, so Vince returns. Vince joins the board. He brings Barrios, the other executive, I forget her name, a longtime executive, former chairperson.
Wilson, I think her name is. And interestingly, of course, as a reminder, like a year ago, he fired both of the people he brought back were people who were fired by him a year ago because of, like, there had been like a negative stock valuation over the course of a quarter, and then somebody had to kind of be the fall guys for that, and it was the two of them, and then they were the ones he brought back, which is interesting.
Very stable genius we have here.
Yeah.
So within days, this was like the first, like the Vince thing kind of wasn't a huge bombshell. We always sort of thought Vince is going to find his way to get back. This scandal will go away. He'll be back. Stephanie, who last year had taken a leave of absence, had left the company for a while, returned within weeks of the story breaking about Vince and Vince parting with the company. She comes back to assume co-COO responsibilities. She posted that she's taking another break and extending that break and resigned, seemingly effective immediately, from the company. So she's back to watching the product as a fan. She thanked the universe. She said the company's in great hands with her husband and with Nick, and I guess with Vince too. She's gone. Is this, in your opinion, is this a writing on the wall? Is this a, I don't want to be a part of this anymore? Is this, I can't believe my dad is doing this? Or is it, I'm in a position where I can do a ton of other things. I'm about to, get hundreds of millions of dollars from a potential sale?
I think I have a little bit of a contrarian view on what's going on here. And here's why. I think the easy narrative to craft is Stephanie is, disgusted by what's going on. If the Saudi stuff is really being discussed at the board level, like she's just like, I want no part of this. I was a big advocate for women's wrestling, and this, I want to wash my hands of this and step away. I don't necessarily think that's what's happening. Now, ultimately, if they wind up selling to the Saudi investment group, different calculus there, that may be what's going on. But my thing is, remember the larger context here. A year and a half, 2 years ago, whatever it was, her husband basically has a massive heart attack. I mean, that's what happened. And I think that took a lot out of her personally. And also, remember when she took the leave of absence the first time, it was very much centered around, I want to spend time with my family. And so my take on this is the narrative that I've speculated and crafted. I think when she left the first time, it was, her reasons were sincere. She was exhausted. She had to deal with so much on the home front and just wanted to really devote herself more to her 3 kids and maybe other interests too that weren't as time consuming. So then all this craziness happens with Vince, where he's like leaving. And I think she comes back out of loyalty, actually, not because of like a negative relationship with her dad, but because she's like, number one, someone probably behind the scenes said, look, because of the nature of some of the stuff that's going on, having a female co-CEO is optics wise is going to be helpful for us. A, but B, I think Vince was like, I need someone that I can really trust to be sort of my eyes and ears as far as what's going on.
There has to be a big man somewhere there. And
exactly right.
Shane hasn't had the interest or willingness to stick with the company. Stephanie's been a loyal employee her entire life.
Okay. Exactly right. And that's what I come back to is like, if you, it's so easy to sort of point to this and say, oh, some weird relationship. And I mean, I've had that thought myself, like weird relationship between Steph and her dad. And like, does she secretly hate him? And, all this stuff. If you look at like the last 20 years, it seems to me the more challenging relationship is Shane and Vince. Like, like that's a weird sort of like Shane like leaves and wants to do his own thing. And so anyway, so here's the bottom line. It is absolutely possible that this is a scenario where she sees the handwriting on the wall about where this sale is potentially going. And she's like, I want to distance myself from this company as soon as I can. I'm getting the heck out of here. Possible. I think it's more about, with Vince back, she is now sort of going back to where her mindset was several months ago, where it's like, I just don't want to be a part of this. Even if they sell to Comcast, I'm done with this. I want to go be with my family and do other things. And it was only out of loyalty to the company and to her dad that she sort of took on that responsibility temporarily. I could be wrong.
If Triple H left the company because of his health scare and Stephanie followed suit, that your explanation makes a lot of sense. Her spending more time with her family, her husband is now as neck deep in the business as he's ever been.
Yeah.
The businesses, I mean, the McMahon Levesque family is not really separating themselves so much. Yes, Stephanie's not going to be going to board meetings, not going to be handling business side, but she's still going to be very much up to her neck in wrestling because her husband and now her dad, it's like almost like the status quo's back. So yeah, I mean, forget the business side of it right now. I like Stephanie. I think it couldn't have been easy being raised. I mean, in some ways, I'm sure it's easy having a dad like McMahon and access to great schools and a great life. What she has done with the opportunities she's earned and been given have been great. She's been a great ambassador for the company. She's, I'm sure, exactly what Vince sort of wished both of them would have done with their career, with their lives, with Shane and Stephanie. So this decision, I'm sure, is probably, in some ways making Vince sad, but, with Paul Triple H Levesque there as chief content officer, like my real concern is about the product that's put on television and removing Stephanie. Forget where the business who might buy the business. With Stephanie there, I always sort of felt like the women's division will be represented. I think Triple H would have done that too, because I think he sees the value in that. But I think it does give some credibility to have a McMahon lifer still in that business. But in 2022, I don't think 78-year-old Vince should be the McMahon represented. Stephanie seemed like it was just fine. And I say all that because I thought the company drastically improved when Vince stepped away last summer. So I'm very concerned. I'm happy for Stephanie. She's going to have a great life. I hope she does something really awesome next. But her departure was the first of a couple of big shocks this week. And full disclosure, are you a stockholder of WWE? I am not. No, I am not. So you and I have no vested interest in what happens here, other than just sort of being interested in the business side of it and being fans. Okay, so in the last 48 hours, after Stephanie's departure, within like 24 hours, the machine started of like he's back to negotiate television rights and it was the way I guess the announcement was crafted, seeking to maximize. Basically, that means see if there's anyone who wants to buy the company. Mm-hmm. So within a day, lists were thrown out with a lot of the obvious contenders, things like NBC Comcast, who runs Raw, who runs NXT on the USA Network. Fox has to come into the equation because they run SmackDown, two of the biggest giant media companies. And like a lot of things these days, streaming services started getting involved. Where could WWE, who would want to buy WWE? There was Netflix, all streaming services, Netflix, YouTube, Apple, Amazon, big companies were discussed. And I mean, you might know this more than I do. It takes the media rights negotiations are still probably a few months away, but any kind of large scale sale like that requires filings and probably requires some approval. Yeah. That's a multi-month process typically.
Yeah, right? and this to me is the biggest thing, the biggest single thing that I think casts doubt on the report about the Saudi Arabia deal is just the timeline.
Yeah, because so what I say, like within a day of the lists being made, they started getting reports is that WWE has sort of has a handshake agreement, is going to be sold to. They they didn't confirm it, but sources started reporting. Did we all get worked up over this potential already done deal? No one else is being asked.
There's no way it's an already done deal. That's impossible, because they just announced like last week that they had I think it was JP Morgan, that they had solicited the services JP Morgan to explore the possibility of like what a sale would look like and so on. Again, if you are a publicly traded, so a couple things here. First of all, you're a publicly traded company, so there's all sorts of notifications and notices that you have to prepare, and even if a sale is imminent, that you have to steps that you have to go through to actually effectuate the sale.
Right.
Secondly, you're a publicly traded company with a market cap of about $6.5 billion. So what that means is the total outstanding value of the shares that exist is $6.5 billion. A deal that size is not going to be put together, or even in principle, in a matter of 3 days.
Yeah.
So the conspiratorial talk that started was, oh, Vince has been working on this deal sort of on his own for a while. And I'm like, you can't do that with a publicly traded company. Like that is a non-starter. Like, he had to get back on the board to do this. And that's why there were all these machinations to get him back on his part, to get him back on the board. Because he's like, I can't negotiate on behalf of a company that I have now, simply a majority stockholder in. Okay, so there's that aspect of it. So the other thing is, though, is if you were someone who wanted to put out as much negative PR about WWE as possible, is there a plausible story, that you could have put out related to the sale that would have potentially done more damage in the PR sense? Certainly not the stock sense, because the stock would, but in a PR sense, is there any story that you could put out other than possibly Donald Trump is going to buy the WWE? Than Saudi Arabia. I mean, so to my mind, it now in hindsight seems like, I'm sure it's a consideration when they are at this phase. Like, here are the possible entities that could purchase this. So I'm not saying it's coming out of nowhere, and certainly they have an existing business relationship, of course.
Right.
But I do think the timing of this story, like, popping up, makes me think that whoever leaked the information, even if they knew something, that the intent behind it was to undermine Vince, probably, but undermine the WWE. So,
yeah, I think probably so. Vince working behind this. If Vince, what did Vince do between June 2022 and January? I think he was sitting around his pool. I think he was not trying to. He was not reading the words of the verbiage of all of his contracts. I mean, is it really a retirement? Did he really leave the company if he's still the majority stockholder? And apparently they couldn't do anything without him. Like, what does it really mean? Did he ever really relinquish control of the company? Probably not.
I think in practice he did. But I think that, to answer your question, I think he spent a lot of time probably talking to Stephanie, and a lot of time probably talking to his attorneys to figure out, like, what are my options here? Like, if I'm just a bystander to a sale, what am I looking at? Like, is that this is me projecting rationality onto Vince.
That's why I have you on.
And it may not, he may not think this way. Again, it could just be purely like, I'm going to get them. I'm going to get them. It's my company. I started this. I built it, blah, blah, blah. So it could be pure vitriol.
It feels very on brand for Vince, I'll just say.
Sure. And it's just so funny how, the old saying about life imitating art. I mean, if you want to call it art, he has become, it used to be that the Mr. McMahon character was this hyper version of what he was in real life. And now it seems like, oh no, the real life him is now superseding the Mr. McMahon, or at least becoming Mr. McMahon. So assuming there's some level of rationality, what he should have been doing if he wanted to potentially get back would be, what are all the hypothetical possibilities here? From me sort of forcing my way back onto the board, to me just being a passive beneficiary of a sale. That's how a rational person would approach this. Be like, I got all the time in the world right now. Like, I can just cool my heels and just kind of weigh these potential possibilities and then pursue whichever one I like best. I don't know that that's the way he approaches things. He's obviously a different breed of cat, and I think in some ways that has served him very well, and in some ways that has served him horribly.
The Saudi investment fund, like a lot of the other potential players in this, it's got to be taken very seriously because of all these people. They have the most money of all these potential suitors by many, many, many times. The Saudi investment funds somewhere $750 billion.
Yeah,
I believe so.
Yeah, minimum 600 billion they've got to work with. So
right, so they have the cash to top any potential high-end offer that comes from any of these other suitors, including other investment houses. In our conversations, we tossed out a word like Berkshire Hathaway. That sort of be along the lines, Blackstone, whatever these places are that just have billions and are now sort of getting in things. However, like you definitely pointed out in our discussion, we have media rights coming up this year to renegotiate with Comcast, with Fox. There's going to be more eyes, more money on the table. These deals don't get done for less money ever. They always get done for more money.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about the Saudis is that's a polarizing, that's an entity that is not universally loved and respected. And I mean, everyone knows there are human rights issues in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Radioactive would be a good word.
I think radioactive would be so. What's the most dangerous situation is when the most radioactive player has the most money and the least to lose, and can make it difficult for everybody else. We've seen that play out in other things in America in the last week too, where a small group of folks can really dictate how things go and can make life very difficult for the people. Okay, so when you're talking about $600 billion, will NBC, Fox, the companies that will likely need to put this on television, can the Saudis just outbid any feelings about what they should do?
So this is where we get back to the big question to my mind, which I talked about at the top, which is what is Vince's actual motivation here? And the reason I say this is because if it is either or both, one, I don't care about anything but the bottom line figure, the check that I'm going to get when this company sells. The biggest number wins. That's all I care about. It's the Saudis for sure.
If the Saudis are in it to win it, it will be. Yeah,
correct. Because no one can or would outbid them.
Right. NBC, Fox, they can say, hey, $9 billion. That's a fair offer for that company.
Absolutely.
Though the Saudis will say $12 billion.
Right.
You say $10 billion, I'm going to get $15 billion. It doesn't matter to them.
Right. So the other piece of this, though, and this is where it gets a little sort of in the intrigue category. If his true desire here is to not only have a sale, but also have a sale that results in him being the one who is in charge creatively, it is also possible that the Saudi deal may be the only one that he has to make. Because if you look at like a media company is not going to be like, no, you cannot, like we'll pay you as a consultant for a couple of years and pat you on the head when you give us ideas that we'll never use.
Right.
But we're not going to let you run creative. We're media companies and we have creative people. They would probably want to keep Triple H, but we have creative people that we are going to want to be involved in this, and they're not going to answer to you.
Yeah, media companies aren't going to make any decisions that will affect their business for Vince's ego.
Correct. So it's just like when Disney buys Star Wars, George Lucas, it's like, thanks for your ideas. We're not going to use them. Like that's the deal. Like you got your billions. That's the price.
Right.
That's it. With the Saudis, that might be because for several reasons that might be a part of the package that they're willing to offer, and Vince, as the ostensibly operating in the best interest of the shareholders, could say, look, they're going to give us 25% more than any of the other bidders. We have to take this offer for the good of the shareholders, when the reality is part of his motivation is, and also I know that they will let me stay in charge until possibly literally the day I die.
Let's explore that.
Yeah.
Let's just take this and see.
But there's a huge problem with it that we'll talk about in a minute.
Okay. Well, let's let's address that problem. Let's say
Yeah.
this plays out to our sort of some of our worst fears, that Vince is so ego driven, he's willing to. He just cares about the number at the end. It's his company. He bought it from his dad. He's not going to let anyone wrestle it away from him. This will. When I left, I was still maintaining control. This will always be mine. And sure, my son, my daughter, they did great, but I should be the one making these decisions. I miss ripping up the show at 6 p.m. To hell with my employees. To hell with the well-being of my female talent. To hell with folks who have consciences about human rights and the geopolitical atmosphere. I don't care. I'm going to get $13.5 billion and I get my show back and I can do whatever I want.
Yeah. Okay.
So that happens in January 2024. Monday Night Raw opens in Riyadh. So first of all, Hulk Hogan was a real American. Like, I'm not such a America wonk that I don't care about that, but like,
well, I am. So
I know. So like, does WWE ceases to become an American sort of company? How does that just itself potentially damage the company?
So I think there's a couple of elements to that and you raise a good point. So the first thing is purely the fact that it would be owned by foreign-based interests. I think
lots of
there's a sentimental value there that I think would be possibly a negative. But that's a minor thing. Like if this were a company, let's say, based in France or Japan or whatever, right. that would be like, that's it was an American company and now it's not an American company. For the patriotic folks, it would be like, that's a little bit of a bummer. But I can speak personally to that. Like it wouldn't keep me from watching. I would still watch it. They would just be kind of like, that's too bad. And then you'd move on and be like, is the show good? Is the show not good?
Right.
The Saudi Arabia thing specific to them is really going to be a problem. And the reason is we go back to another entity that this Saudi Arabia investment group has created, which is Live Golf.
Yep.
So Live Golf, I follow that pretty closely. I'm somewhat of a PGA fan, and Live Golf now it's not apples to apples because that's a startup as opposed to established brand with, as we talked about in the group chat, infrastructure and a way of doing business and everything.
Yeah, that'd be like we're talking like the Saudis bought the PGA. That'd be what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean it would be more like that.
Right.
But with Live Golf, the interesting thing about the way that golf works is those guys aren't, under contract to an organization in the same way that an AEW or WWE wrestler is under contract to their organization. So when Live Golf started, they could go to Phil Mickelson or, Bryson DeChambeau, Sergio Garcia. Like I'm talking the top tier golfers in the world and be like, whatever you make, we're just ×2 and then come play for us. And initially, again, because they aren't contracted to an organization, there was sort of a gray area there or like an uncertainty about like the PGA is probably not going to like this, but will they let us play in their tournaments still? Like, because we like to play in both. And of course, the PGA quickly closed ranks. It was like, absolutely not. European Tour, same deal. Like, absolutely not. Because they saw this as like an existential threat, which it potentially was. But the point I'm getting to is even with some of the biggest names in golf, they could not get a TV deal. They have like a couple of small deals in like a couple of European countries. And then weirdly, there's like one TV like affiliate in like Ontario, Canada, which I think is the only North American TV deal they have. Everything else is just, we put it on YouTube and Facebook. We just stream it live for free. That's what they do.
Right.
So to go back to something we were talking about before, the big inducement and the big reason why negotiating a possible sale now is so important is because of those upcoming rights renegotiation discussions.
Mm-hmm.
That is a huge asset, a huge carrot to dangle in front of potential buyers who are interested. The Saudi Arabia piece basically takes that off the table because I can tell you for a fact, USA Network, when that deal is up, they're not gonna broadcast a Saudi Arabian owned WWE.
Right.
Fox sure as hell is not going to do it. So those two companies.
Fox wouldn't be any. I mean, I'm not trying to to put any pressure on right leaning Fox, but they're not anymore. I mean, they know also they can't.
Well, I mean, Fox News is right leaning, but I mean, the Fox Sports is Fox Sports a separate division. Like, right. I don't think they would have any interest in doing that. And I mean, here's the other thing: Fox is lukewarm on renewing SmackDown as it is. If you throw Saudi Arabia into the mix, like I think, like if none of the past week's stuff had happened, and we were just talking about the rights deals this year, and you asked me, like, what are the odds that SmackDown stays on Fox? Again, this is without Vince involved. This is just status quo. I would say 50-50. I would say it's certainly possible, but I don't think that they have – the economics of broadcast are different than the economics of cable, and I don't know that Fox is getting what they need out of that deal.
Yeah.
So anyway – the point of all this is if Vince cares about anything related to the profile, the brand, the legacy of WWE, and, ego-wise, there could be he could care somewhat about that. Selling to the Saudis would be a massive mistake because I think within – whatever long the duration of the rights deals are, when those expire, I think WWE would only be on either some kind of proprietary streaming service that they would create, or just direct on YouTube with like Live is. I think that's it. I mean,
they'd have to like buy back the network from Peacock or restart the network up, or
I think something like that would happen. I mean, the Peacock deal was 5 years, and it started. I think it's been 2 years now. So so that would stay in place. Like they're I'm just pausing here because I'm thinking, would there be any way for Comcast to wriggle out of having to do the archive stuff, which for sure stay on there? But I'm just wondering if they could wriggle out of like the premium live event, like broadcasts. Probably not. I would say they probably would be locked in for 3 more years there, or whatever the duration is. But after that, they would be kind of on their own. The caveat to all of this is, again, sort of projecting rationality onto someone who may not be rational right now. If you're Vince McMahon and you're 77 or 78 years old, you have to be thinking about things like, realistically, how much longer am I going to be able to do this? And is it worth 3 years? Let's say, just throw out a number. Is it worth 3 years of me being in charge at sort of an advanced age? It's already tougher than it was. You're feeling it. It's tougher than it was 10 years ago, certainly tougher than it was 20 years ago, physically and just kind of energy-wise. Is it worth that to have this happen? And again, I think it goes back to the thing where if he has the mentality of nobody's driving this car but me, and if that means I have to take it off a cliff, I'll take it off a cliff. If that's a mentality, they would consider this. If that's not the mentality, then I still think, if you gun to my head and you say you're a time traveler from 9 months from now, you're like, there was a sale this year, guess who it was with? If I have one chance to answer correctly, I still say Comcast.
So that news kind of broke 2 days ago. Cooler heads have somewhat prevailed today. A lot of the wrestling dirt sheets are sort of re-cemented their opinion that nothing has been confirmed. I've seen things from I've talked to all my WWE sources. No one's heard about anything concrete. You said it great yesterday. If there was any sort of actual deal in principle, it would be in the Wall Street Journal as of today. If it was a legitimate business agreement that wheels were starting, it would be reported in all the business periodicals that are coming out. So far, it's been on, Wrestling Purist, Fightful. We haven't,
Reddit,
taking nothing away from those. So yes, seems like the initial announcements we were saying that WWE has been sold to the Saudis is not confirmed. Isn't it good business sense? Like, if you're Vince, I guess, if Vince is still back in charge, don't you want to like hear what any offers are from anybody else? Don't you want to like know from some domestic media partners, like, are you even willing to consider talking to the Saudis about this? Like, don't you have to do all that? And if you don't do all that, if Vince wants $13.5 billion or whatever it is he in any sort of actionable position for not doing right by the shareholders, or does it not matter?
Well, I mean, both, to answer your question, both from a maximizing your own potential back end on this deal, and from a fiduciary duty standpoint to the shareholders, you have to go through these motions. I mean, you have to see, and again, that's why you bring in JP Morgan or some other group to help. You know, Dan Snyder's doing the same thing, and that was months ago. And like, to give you an idea, of course, now granted, apples to oranges, because he is a franchise owner in a league, so there's other stuff that you have to do. But the point is like, these types of deals require hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of work by a lot of different aspects to put them together, and kind of, to your point, see what the universe of possibilities is, see what the potential financial, upside and downside is for different kinds of scenarios, and then make a decision based on that. This is not, I'll tell you this. The other thing, and this is the part, and we haven't talked about this yet, but the thing that really got my attention about these sort of rumors and reports, which I don't believe them, to be clear. I'm sure that at some high level this has been at least tossed out in a sort of vague way, but I don't think there's a deal or anything. But the thing that really got my attention was the rumor said that one of the reasons they were doing this was to make it a private company again.
Yeah.
And that scenario, when I thought about that, I was like, no, that's actually one reason why you might go this route. Because if you want to have the ability to basically buy back all the stock, and then on top of that have billions and billions of dollars still in play, the Saudis would probably be the only route you could go to do that. Because if you're Comcast, you're going to pay what you have to pay to get the company, and then you're going to expect it to make a profit from there. The Saudis, like with Live, for example, they don't care about that, because one of their primary motivations is public relations. It isn't to have something that can make a profit. It is to frame Saudi Arabia in a more positive light internationally, for PR reasons, for tourism reasons, for a variety of reasons. And so they're concerned, like, I think would be perfectly fine with a scenario where WWE is not necessarily a profitable venture, and they're more than happy to subsidize it. Whereas these other companies are going to be like, we're going to need you to turn a profit. But they're also in a better position to make that happen, because if Comcast or Fox buys WWE, from the perspective of the fans, there would be very little, especially in the first year or two, that would change. It would be virtually seamless transition.
And I would like to think those companies would probably want as much of what's been going on in the last year. So they'd want Triple H, and I bet they wouldn't. They would want Vince at least an arm's length.
Yeah, they would want continuity and stability, and what that would mean would be probably some kind of, again, consulting deal or arrangement for Vince. But again, it's sort of a like, here's an email address, Vince. If you have an idea, send an email to it, and we'll ignore it. I don't think that's something that Vince is going to be interested in, and he controls so much of the stock that is voting stock that it's like ultimately they can't do a deal without him. And now the bylaws say they can't do a deal without him. So I will say this as well. The thing that we haven't really talked about directly. You alluded to it a few minutes ago. But I said it, if Vince is at all concerned about like the product itself, like WWE, like not just like, oh, you're associated with the Saudis. Because here's the thing. Again, they're already associated with the Saudis, and there are plenty of companies, including WWE, that we are fans of or consumers of that are associated with China or other companies that have questionable human rights. So like this idea that like they're pristine now, and if they do this deal, they're not going to be pristine, like that's a little naive.
Agreed.
But what will happen is immediately there will be, an unprecedented shift in what you see on TV simply by virtue of the fact that there is going to be a contingent of high-profile performers who will quit immediately, even if it means that they're going to lose money. They will walk.
Rattle them off. Who you got?
Sami Zayn, probably Kevin Owens.
Okay.
I would think several of the women wrestlers, if they sort of see the long-term implications of this, I think you'll see other people that probably we're not thinking of who probably have been more private about their – well, MVP, he's talked about it. He hasn't worked in Saudi Arabia. But other people who are probably more private about their concerns, or who were like, I'm okay with us doing 2 shows a year in Saudi Arabia, but that's very different than being actually owned by the Saudis. And that's, again, unprecedented because we've never had a scenario where – so just think about – let's say it's just one guy. Let's say it's just Sami Zayn. How disruptive would that be to the stories that they have been telling on TV for the last year and a half and intend to tell through WrestleMania at least? That would be – just that one thing alone would be dramatically negative for the on-screen product. And from the standpoint of people who are like, look, I have an Apple phone. I'm a big fan of like Nike, whatever. Moral quandaries are not my thing, but I do care about the on-screen quality of the product. That is going to go long before those rights deals expire and they can't get a new TV deal. That is going to go, I think, in the toilet. And that is going to be a major, major problem. And
you think
even Vince, I think, probably would know that. The question is his vendetta / desire to cash in as much as he can supersede that?
John Cena once apologized in Chinese.
That pissed me off a little bit. I got to be honest.
For making, for some comment about, I guess it was Taiwan.
He just referred to Taiwan in passing as a country. He just said, the first country I think it was the Fast and the Furious he was in or something.
Yeah.
And he said, the first country we, premiered in was Taiwan. Or he didn't even say Taiwan. He just said, we just had our first premiere in some country. He just used the word country referring to Taiwan. That was it. And he had to apologize in Mandarin.
So, I think Cena, who has been a staunch supporter, loyal soldier to Vince, but, does Dwayne Johnson remove himself from the company?
Absolutely. Those guys are, there's no way. Yeah. They will wash their hands of,
right.
They're like, absolutely not. To go back to the Liv example, like there's some guys who were like, this is more money than I'm ever going to make, like in my whole career. Of course I will go do this. And there were other guys like Tiger Woods. He got offered reportedly a high 9-figure deal to come play for Liv. So we're talking probably minimum $700 million. I know that, Phil Mickelson
nearly doubles his net worth.
Just insane amount of money, and Tiger was like, I don't think so. So the first person I thought of other than Sami Zayn was The Rock, because I'm like, if you're a guy who has like a major movie, you're a big movie star, and you are a PR maestro, there is no way that you're going to come back.
Who might have presidential ambitions.
Sure, could have political ambitions, like all kinds of stuff. But certainly, you want an image, a public image that is non-controversial and can do business with anybody in the country. And right now, for the last decade, he's done a superb job of that. He's not going to want to touch any Saudi-owned WWE with the 10-foot pole. I don't think. I mean, look,
Right.
he's too smart a businmean to do that.
Yeah.
So Brock Lesnar will go. He'll go absolutely go work wherever.
Brock will be fine. I mean, Roman's probably on that fence, which he's, because he's not quite. He's almost in that like rarefied air. He's nearly there in that rarefied air. I think he also has some ambitions outside of wrestling at some point too. So, but like everyone just going down, Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch appear to be lifers with the company, also appear to have a fair amount of scruples though, I would think. I think there's a lot of performers who have some fairly progressive, not progressive in a sort of a, in one sense, but more of a like, hey, like a modern westernized sense to know this might not be great for my brand, which I've undoubtedly built. If you look at it that way, this makes a potential sale to Saudis seem like an absolute disaster. Like not even just, some would call it disaster to bring just Vince back into the fold at all when we were seemingly clear of him, but to disrupt everything we've seen in the last half decade that basically is culminating with what we're sort of seeing right now. It would be devastating because AEW is not ready to slip in and fill that void. Mm-hmm. So we as wrestling fans would be forced to sort of swallow this and reconcile within ourselves how much we want to dedicate to this, or the wrestling business changes in a way we've never seen before.
I think it could be, the range of possibilities is dramatic here, because I think this could still wind up being not a sale to the Saudis, not that scenario, but whatever's going to happen in the next few months, I think could still wind up being a big positive, depending on how it goes. If it is Vince is limited to the corporate side, maybe they wind up just renegotiating the rights deals after all, and this whole like company sale thing is just something he kind of used to get himself back in. Triple H remains in charge of creative, and Vince kind of rides off into the sunset at some point when he gets too old to do this stuff anymore. That would be okay. Or if they sell to another media company, in which case Vince would be, even if in his mind he's like, oh, they'll keep me on, he would be pushed out in the same way that the Crockett's were pushed out when Turner bought, Mid-Atlantic, and he had it. This is the first thing I thought of when I heard about the Saudi deal, because I'm like, man, Vince may think that he's going to be in charge, or even like if they sell the Comcast or whatever, like Vince may think he's going to be in charge, but he's going to get some kind of deal like Ted Turner gave to the Crockett's, and then within like a year he'll have no presence, like he won't even have an office. And I'm sure that will be what happens. I do think there are advantages to the company not being publicly traded. Whether that winds up being a positive, I think, really depends on how involved Vince McMahon is. If that's the scenario, if they go back to being a private company, or they are just subsumed by some other larger entity, I think if Vince is heavily involved and can sort of operate behind closed doors, which is maybe again one of his goals here, that's bad. If it's a thing where they no longer have to worry about some of the things that, being beholden to shareholders anymore, that probably opens them up a little more creatively than they have been, which is not to say they're not creative. I mean, I do think they're doing a lot of good stuff, but I still, and maybe this is foolish and naive, I still am holding out hope that this is going to result in something positive. But I will say the nightmare scenario is they're bought by the Saudis, several high-profile people quit, and then before you know it, they're not even on TV anymore. And then what is it? Like, are we watching like just sort of an evil version of NWA Power on YouTube every week? Like I'm barely invested enough to watch Raw at this point. Like I'm going to be checked out on that. If the on-screen product declines in the way that I'm thinking it's going to, like, and I'm talking, I mean, Sami Zayn would not appear on TV again. That'd be it.
Yeah.
If it declines that sharply, I'm out.
One thing we're not going to see, we talked about this, offline, was that you're not going to see the women in full head coverings on Raw. You're not going to see every broadcast being out of Saudi Arabia because the Saudi Investment Fund, one of their goals, like you were saying earlier, is to look as modern and westernized as possible.
That's exactly right.
And they would swallow whatever they needed to swallow and reconcile within themselves. How can they, that's part of their strategy too, is to not make everything more, they want to represent themselves more like the rest of the world.
Exactly right. And that's one thing, again, to go back to the Live example, like they deliberately they want to have events in the UK and the United States, and they do. And if you go to YouTube and watch like a Live event on, their broadcast or whatever, for lack of a better word, it's indistinguishable from like what you would see on a PGA broadcast, other than the branding and who's there and stuff like that. It looks normal as terms of a golf broadcast. It would be the same thing with WWE. Like, yes, the shows that are in Saudi Arabia would have those restrictions, but they would still, at least in theory, they would want shows in the United States and the UK and France or Japan or wherever to look the way that they do now. But that raises another point, which is this: would major venues continue to want to work with them? I mean, then now you're really getting into, and this is the point that I made in the group chat, is like the reason that you want to go Comcast or Fox or, even like a streaming service, although for reasons that I won't belabor here, I think that's less likely than it would have been a couple of years ago.
Disney would have made sense a couple of years ago.
Right. The short version of that story is what people what the executives thought at those companies thought about streaming has not come to pass, which is basically, as there are more cord cutters and as broadcast viewership and cable viewership drops, that is good. That slack is going to be picked up by streaming services. And for a while that was true. And that's when you saw like Netflix giving deals to everybody under the sun and Disney Plus spending all this money. Well, that has plateaued. And now those companies are losing money and cutting costs and, trying to spin stuff off. And so they are not in a posture probably to make the kind of bid to get WWE. I could be wrong, but Comcast, it all makes sense because they have the network. They already, meaning, the NBC, USA, et cetera. So they have the TV aspect, and they also have their own streaming service. So it all fits together. But the point I was going to make was the infrastructure already exists. If you are one of those media companies, everything you need is there. Business reputation. You have the WWE continuity. So their staff, they know how to book all the venues. That's not changed. Like Madison Square Garden isn't going to say, I'm sorry, we're not going to do business, with Comcast or a Comcast-owned company. Like you're not going to have to worry about anything there. You also have existing TV infrastructure, existing streaming infrastructure, et cetera, on the line. So everything is in place to have WWE be potentially bigger than it's ever been if it's run correctly. With Saudi Arabia Investment Group, you are starting from scratch, and people aren't going to want to do business with you, and existing talent is going to quit. How does that work? I mean, how is that logistically going to work? Now, from the shareholders' perspective, it's, you're probably, putting the moral stuff aside, you're probably okay with it because it's going to be a huge number and you're going to get paid just like Vince is going to get paid. But then where does it go? I mean, I'll make one more prediction. Once the existing agreements for like the next 2 or 3 years, I think there are already agreements in place. But if a Saudi-owned WWE comes to fruition and it still exists 3 years from now or whatever, I think WrestleMania will be in Saudi Arabia from now on for the foreseeable future.
Wow! Just like you predicted, if Comcast does buy the company, WrestleMania will be on NBC.
I think they'll at least try putting WrestleMania and see how it works. They might not want to keep it there forever, but there will be a WrestleMania on NBC. They talked about that a little bit with Fox when they first made the Fox deal. Was like, we could see a WrestleMania on Fox presented in the same way that Fox would present a Super Bowl, for example, which actually is kind of a cool idea. But I think you'll see that. At this point, I'm really rooting for Comcast or Fox to be, if they sell, for Comcast or Fox to be the ones who buy it. And if they don't sell, I'm rooting for Vince to ride off into the sunset.
Well, either way, we were all sort of thrown into a tizzy the last couple of days. I think cooler heads are beginning to prevail as people are saying, wow, well, this isn't just something that gets negotiated in 24 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll save predictions for another time because this is not gonna be settled and finalized by the time we hit the air next Tuesday. So we went an hour 5. We went inside baseball, and I wouldn't have wanted to do it with anyone other than you, Tom. I appreciate your insight. I like that you get really inside about it, and we both speak each other's language when it comes to that stuff. So I dig it. Any big wrestling news you want to talk about before we part for the night?
I mean, I'm excited for the Royal Rumble, assuming nobody quits. I mean, that's the thing that right now I'm worried about from an on-screen standpoint. Is just like, God, please keep the roster intact at least through the Rumble.
Yeah.
Like the final thought. The one thing that really worries me a little bit about this is that if these rumors sort of get out of control backstage and they're unfounded, that somebody is going to make a rash decision that is going to mess something up. And I just hope that, whether it's Triple H or William Regal or whoever, somebody's like, look, here, you've heard a lot of stuff this week. We're here to tell you, it's not true, or to the extent it is true, like, just be candid with them and say, like, this is what's going on. But whatever decisions you're going to make, talent, please make it based on reality and not a Reddit post from, some anonymous user.
I believe Triple H has that in him to do it. Without knowing much about him, I believe Nick Khan probably he was a big time agent. He knows how to do that. I can't say the same for Vince at all, or maybe even Stephanie, just because she's the product of Vince. Who knows? But we will continue to monitor this. We will be on hopefully tomorrow night to talk about AEW. I'll be on with Cheats. Tom, you're always welcome to join us to talk AEW, even though I know it's really not completely up your alley these days. But tonight, Dynamite's going on right now. I haven't checked it. I'm sure it's been rumors about some big returns. We'll talk about all that tomorrow. We will talk about WWE, hopefully stuff inside the ring next Tuesday. We got SmackDown. There'll be another Raw, and we'll be back next week. TG, as far as Wrestling Chat with Friends go, you were best for business tonight.
Oh, great.
And
one wrestling comment, since we haven't really talked about anything, I will say the Bloodline story, especially what we saw on Friday.
Yeah.
This is not hyperbole. For my money, it is the most entertaining story on television. Not in WWE, not in wrestling, on television. There is nothing else on television I would rather be watching right now than Sammy, Roman, and Paul Heyman, doing their thing.
White Lotus is great. Ozark is fantastic, but I agree completely. Yes. Reruns of Scrubs I could watch all day long. But yes, nothing is more entertaining right now than seeing how great Sammy is.
Just the subtleties are so, it's beautiful.
Just Paul calling him Booby, It's been fantastic. And we'll talk about it all next week. Thank you guys for joining us on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook. Go there, like us, share us, tell your friends. Let's grow it. For EJ the Collector, for TG, we will see you next week. Thanks so much for listening.